And after being paralyzed, I was able to work my way back from that condition, regain my mobility, and go on to do over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting shows all over the world.
Hey Zesties, welcome to the Gleeful Talkshow, where we share zesty stories to cultivate the happiness and hero within. In this episode, we will learn about how to hack our mind for success using the 5 F's of achievement, how humor can always be a good thing, and becoming our own superhero. Today's guest is a motivational speaker, leader, and mindset coach who has worked as a fight director and stunt coordinator for stage and film. His ability to engage teams was instrumental in the increased profitability of 3 regional parks by more than 60% under his direction. What's more interesting is that he was also a professional comedian who brought unique entertainments to the military on 6 USO tours to the front lines of both Iraq and Afghanistan. Please welcome the corporate action hero, John Davis. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello. I'm so excited. I am gleeful to be here. Thank you very much.
Oh, great. Yes. So I've read about you, and then you have performed live comedy sword fighting stunt in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm very curious about how you went there, basically.
Well, when I was a young man, I wanted to be a stuntman and a fight director, and I started doing Renaissance festivals, and I put together a comedy sword fighting show called Hack and Slash. The early days of that process, I ended up having a serious back injury, which left me paralyzed. And after being paralyzed, I was able to work my way back from that condition, regain my mobility, and go on to do over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting shows all over the world. And one day while I was in Annapolis, Maryland, I was stepping off of the stage, and these 2 gentlemen walked up and said, "Hey, we've been fans of yours for years. We were wondering if you would be interested in doing USO shows," because they were from the Pentagon. And we were like, sure. So we're very excited. We're like, yeah, absolutely. So we put all our marketing material together, and we went over and we dropped it off on their desk on September 10th, 2001. The next day, September 11th, the day after we were in the Pentagon got hit, and the 2 towers got hit. And they shut down all their offices, and they called us up a month later, and they said, "Can you go immediately?" And immediately we had to go get our shots and our paperwork and all that stuff. So we left in November that year, and we went from November to February, went all over Europe as they were building up to go over to Iraq and Afghanistan. On the second tour, they sent us back to Europe. By that point, most of the soldiers were already out in Afghanistan. And by our third tour, we were already in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by our third, fourth, fifth, and sixth tours, we went all the way out to all of the small forward operating bases. We were a mile from the Syrian border in Iraq. We were Baghdad. We were everywhere in Iraq. Had some pretty harrowing experiences there, but those soldiers were out there in the field, and we showed up and made them laugh for 2 hours, which gave them a little stress relief. And no matter what you think of the wars or why they were there, the U.S. military is a all-volunteer military, and that means that they have volunteered to go anywhere in the world to defend me and my freedoms. So it's the least I could do to go out there and at least make them laugh. And we did a comedy sword fighting show, which was based in Renaissance themed. So we'd show up in Iraq wearing tights. Try not to visualize. Not pretty.
When this happened in 2001, and then you've mentioned previously, at first you weren't really into this presenting to people and doing these comedy shows. So you have a bit of a story before this came into fruition.
My father was an emotional abuser and an alcoholic, and he had 7 kids, and I was the one that he chose to take the brunt of his anger out on. And that manifested into a very overweight 13-year-old. I was 265 pounds at 13 years old and became a complete introvert. And a friend of mine took me to a Renaissance festival that I suddenly got all this positive reinforcement, because when he took me there, he didn't just take me there. He put me in a costume. And in fact, he put me in a full armor Viking costume. So now I was a big fellow at that point. When he took me there, I was 17 or 18, and I was already 6'1", and I was a big guy with a beard. And when he put me in full armor with horned helmet and giant battle axes, and all day long, people wanted their picture with me, and I had all this positive reinforcement. And when I came away from there, I was like, God, I really love that. I found in that Renaissance festival, in acting in general, I found a place where I could set down my fears and my self-doubts and be somebody else, and literally found myself in that process. Of course, once you start getting noticed for something and start being recognized for being good at something, your ego can get out of hand, which mine did for a little while. And I brought that back, thank God, eventually. But eventually, I found the passion for sword fighting. And when I met these two gentlemen at the Renaissance Festival, it was Brad Waller and Payson Burt, and they were so talented, and they were two of the top fight directors in the country. And they saw talent in me as an actor and a combatant. And they told me they wanted to help me in my growth, and they gave me their training for free, which I thought was amazing. And so I was getting into the martial arts. I was going for my black belt in Taekwondo, and I was sword fighting, and I was doing all the stage combat at the Renaissance festivals. And then I had my accident, which was a buddy of mine asked me to come help him unload his van. And he was a professional potter. He had boxes of clay in his van. They're 80 pounds a piece. And I went out to his house, and I picked up the very first box. And when I picked up the first box, and I turned to set it outside of the van, my spine broke in two, and I collapsed and was paralyzed. And at that point, they took me to the hospital, and the doctor told me, he said, "We don't think you're ever going to walk again, but if you do, you'll never have a physical career. You'll never be able to, you have to think of a sedentary lifestyle now." And meanwhile, at this point, my goal in life was to be a stuntman and a fight director and a martial artist. So during that time, a friend of mine came in and he handed me a book, and the book was called The Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee, which, if you really think about it, could have been taken as a really cruel joke, but because he brought the martial artist who had just told he'd never do martial arts again, a book by the greatest martial artist that ever lived about martial arts. But I found out later that Bruce wrote that book when he was in traction in the hospital, had just been told he'd never do martial arts again. And when you read that book is all about his philosophy of martial arts. It's not about do this, and this style. It's about his mental process through martial arts. And so I found a couple things in there that were really fascinating. One of them was staying very present. Be in the present moment. Don't worry about the past or the future. Worry about being right here, right now, making it the best it can be. The second thing that I found in there was mental flexibility. No matter what anybody said about your life, you don't have to take their belief. You can take your own. And so I decided that I was not going to take the doctor's belief. And I just started taking my moments, and I started working my muscles from my neck down, piece at a time. And eventually what happened was I got down to my hips, and I actually flexed my hips, and the doctors were blown away because it was below the injury. But at 30 days, I was able to sit up. By the next month, I was able to walk around, and at a year, I was back to what I would call a normal physicality, but not back to the strength that I was before. And in a year and 6 months, I was back to the strength that I was before. And I climbed up on top of a 3-story tower and jumped off. And I went on and did the 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows, including those ones in the front line after that.
Wow, what a journey. When you were there in the hospital and doing this, what kept you going for that point after reading the book? What was that main takeaway, I guess?
That book was the thing that I held on to, because when you're in a situation like that, first of all, doctors are going to tell you only what they see on x-rays. And they're saying that, well, we don't think you can because of this, this, and this, right? And your family's telling you, well, don't get your hopes up because you may never walk again, because they don't want you to get your hopes up. They don't want you to be depressed and be down, right? So you have all these people around you telling you can't. You've got to take your own moment and make your own choices. Buddha says, what you think you become, you create your world. Gandhi says you must be the change you want to see in the world. Krishna said you are the culmination of your thought. And the Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. And Jesus said, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. And Moses said God's name is I am. Not what he thinks I am, right? What I am. I have to make that declaration. So I had to make that declaration every time they would make a counter. So by holding on to that book and staying into the concept of staying very present in my moment, not theirs. Because if I was putting myself in their moment, then I was not going to get out of that bed ever. So I declared my moment, and I kept my moment.
I just couldn't imagine how you went through on that time. How were you able to develop over time the mental strength whilst being in that situation?
Yeah, that is a great question, and that kind of leads me into a little bit of my 5F stuff, because the biggest thing about your present moment is you can succumb to your fears or you can start to create. That's really the choices you have in your present moment. And your thoughts, words, and deeds are only active in your present moment. And since they're only active in your present moment, if you're acting out of fear, you're creating a negative moment. And so I had to actively stop my fears, because my biggest fears in life at that point were to not be a stuntman, not be a fight director, and not do that work. And eventually it went on to doing the comedy shows, which, with swords and all that stuff too. But my biggest fear was that. So I started studying fear and what was fear. And now I travel all over the world, and I ask audiences all over the world, give me the definition of fear. And their response is really interesting. What happens is the room goes silent. because nobody can think of an answer until somebody says, in the back of the room, you hear this little voice go, false evidence appearing real, right? Yeah, because that's the standard metaphysical answer that people always say now. But when you break fear down scientifically, you suddenly discover a couple things. Number one, fear is not rooted in your present moment, because fear is an emotional reaction to some future event that may or may not happen with you focused on a negative outcome. So fear is simply negatively focused uncertainty. And so I had to get to the space where, well, if it's not rooted in my present, if it's not here and now, and all it really is I'm uncertain about a future and I'm focused on the negative outcome, that's really dumb. Because why would I focus on the negative when I can focus on the positive? What I had to do was I had to start labeling my fear and start setting it aside. My studies after the accident were actually more profound, because going to Iraq and Afghanistan, I had to set my fears aside. And the way I ended up doing that was when I did my studies, I started seeing that we all have a natural primal fight or flight response. And that fight or flight response manifests itself in our natural primal fear response. And that fear response happens whenever we have a fearful response, we go, we gasp for air. It's the first thing we do. If you ever watched National Geographic shows or those safari shows on TV, you know there's always that doomed gazelle, right? There's always one gazelle that's out there in the field and he's eating his grass, looks like this, right? And then suddenly the lion hits the field. The first thing you see the gazelle do is do this. Yeah, it literally gasps for air, right? And if you're a parent and you have children, I can guarantee you have probably seen your child almost get hurt and gone yourself. You've had that same exact primal response. Most people, when they're in fear, don't think they can catch a breath. Don't think they can breathe. And the reason they feel that way is not because they can't get air. It's because their body is full of air and they can't put more in. Okay? So their body is conserving air because our primal response says you have to have a lot of air to run further and faster. Actors on Broadway are literally trained that when they walk on stage and forget their lines, they're literally trained to exhale, relax all their muscles, and all of their lines rush right back into their head because they've turned off the fear response and turned their cognitive thinking brain back on. Because when you go into a fear response, you go into survival mode, and nothing else is important, right? So that's why it works. Now, when I was on the front lines of Iraq and I talked to soldiers, I say, how can you go into a situation where you might get shot at or blown up? And how can you do that? And the first thing they said to me was, well, we all get together and we talk about it. We go, okay, all right, we're going to do this. And they actively exhale. And then they just get really profoundly solid and going towards it. The next thing they said was, it makes it easy, though, because we have an objective. So they can get positively focused, right? They can get fearlessly focused. Now I got 2 of my 5 F's in there already. Fearlessly focused, right? So I said earlier that fear is an emotional reaction. It was just negatively focused uncertainty, right? So what these guys do is they exhale, shut off the fear response, and get positively focused. That's how they get their job done, right? So here I was in the hospital, but that was the same thing I had to do. I had to let go of my fears and I get positively focused. So that's the way I had to do it. So I had fearlessly focused. The biggest struggle of it all was the third of the 5 F's, which is faith. And faith is just belief, confidence. You have to believe you're going to do it. Because if you don't believe you're going to do it, then you're actually succumbing to your fears. You're actually telling yourself, I can't do it. Oh, my God, I'm afraid I can't, is what they're really thinking. You have to believe it. Now, sometimes belief or confidence is really just trust. Trust that you can. And trust is developed by results over time. And so to develop results over time, you have to follow through on your actions. You have to make those choices and then take actions. So you have to fearlessly focus with faith and follow through. Right? So now we're fearlessly focused with faith and follow through. You got 4 of the 5 F's in there. Now, let's talk about follow through for a second. Follow through. You only have one present moment. This is what I discovered in that bed. You only have one present moment. The past is just a collection of present moment memories that have a subconscious belief underlying them. And the future is just a place where you set goals for your next present moment. And the only way that big goal that you have out there ever gets experienced is by stacking small, successful present moments that are in alignment with that goal. Because here's the big secret that most people, and the problem that most people have, is they look at that goal and they think, I have to get to that. I have to get to that. I have to get to that. Well, that's not the way the brain works. The brain only is active in the present moment. You can only do thought, word, and deed in the here and now. And so what's actually happening is when you start stacking these present moments in alignment, that big goal is coming to you. And when you finally experience that big goal, it's going to be in your present moment. It's not going to be in the future. You have to stay very much here and stack small things. So lying in the hospital bed, day one, I started with flexing my neck. Now my injury was at my pelvis. Next day I worked my shoulders and my upper arms. And then I slowly worked my way down my back until I got to the injury point. And then I went to my hips. And I was able to do my hips. Stacking the small present moments, I was able to bypass all of those other issues. And that thing came to me. And I worked in Hollywood. I've worked with movie stars. And the really cool thing is after the fact is that after learning all these things, and I'll bring it to the last of the 5 F's in a minute, after learning all these things, I realized I can do anything in my life. And I did 4,000 comedy sword fighting stunt shows. I worked in Hollywood. I worked with big movie stars. I was a college professor. I was an artistic director of theme parks. Right now I'm a keynote speaker that goes all over the world speaking and teaching. I climbed Mount Sinai. I climbed Machu Picchu. I swam in the blue lagoons of Iceland. I've been to 30 countries around. I've done everything I've ever wanted to do ever since, strictly because I know how to do it now. I know how to stay very present and stay very positive, and then just stack my moments until I get what I want. And it's really much simpler than people make it. And I think it's so simple that people make it hard because it really can't be that simple, can it?
For example, if a negative person saying to you this time, I can't fathom this idea. And what would be a one sentence that you can tell that person?
Well, first I'd say the world is 99% positive. And the way I would prove that is this. I live a half an hour from Cleveland, Ohio, the States. If I had a job in Cleveland and I commuted to Cleveland every day, I would probably pass 1,000 cars on the road. Every day, probably not every day, but possibly every day, I might see the remnants of a car accident, right? Tonight on the news is going to be the anomaly that happened today, which is the accident. Because what should be the headline of the news is that 999 cars made it safely to their destination without a problem, right? And
yeah,
really negative people are only negative because they're focused on the negative. Right? That's one of the issues that we have in the world. People get married to their news, and the news makes money by being negative, right? You know, they get more viewers when they're more negative. And so I stopped watching so much news. I just, something big's going to happen in the world. It's going to come to me. I'm going to find out, right? I'm not overly stressed about all the minutia. But the other thing is that negative people are always negative because of the fact that they're focused on the negative. They look for the negative. Now, here's the problem with this. They're creating a negative present moment, right, which is stacking into their subconscious mind as a past memory of negativity, which is stacking more and more behind, which is creating an underlying subconscious belief of negativity, right? So now you have subconscious belief that the world is a negative place. But here's the weird part. The subconscious mind has two jobs. The first job is to store your memories of your present moments in that subconscious belief. The other thing the subconscious mind does is show you what you're focused on. And I'll give you an example. I'm a person, I love Jeeps. I've had 6 of them in my life. I have one in my garage right now. I love Jeeps. When I drive down the road, I see every Jeep on the road. I see every one. Because it's in my conscious mind. I consciously love Jeeps, so I see Jeeps. Right? Negative people are focused on the negative. So their subconscious mind shows them things to be negative about, which stacks a negative moment in their subconscious belief, which creates a treadmill of negativity. The only way you break that cycle is to consciously focus on a positive and making a positive, successful moment and start stacking it. If you looked at it from a Christian perspective, they would say be born again, basically set down the past, right? Now, here's an interesting thing, and this is going into Buddhism a little bit. In Buddhism, one of the most famous Buddhist quotes is, life is suffering. But the interesting thing is, the word that was translated into suffering was dukkha. And dukkha, in the language that it was translated from, the language of Pali, Pali is what's known as a conceptual language, and English is what's known as a literal language, right? So when they say dukkha, it has a much broader meaning than English can translate. So when English translates dukkha, there's actually 3 translations underneath of the word dukkha. And when people go there and they say, well, what life is dukkha, and they go there and translation 1 is pain or suffering. Translation 2 is habitual response. And translation number 3 is belief from past experience or subconscious belief. So dukkha means life is suffering because of our habitual response to our subconscious mind. So that's what I'm basically saying. If you're habitually responding negatively, you're going to habitually see negative unless you consciously break the cycle. You have to be the one to break that cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for that, John. It's just because, currently I'm also dealing with personal family problems like now. And, when it's triggering every time, like, oh, okay, somebody's hospitalized, we need this money. And I'm the only one, like the eldest, and then the one could help them. So it's like really feeding all these negative information. And just for me is that, as you said, I just need to consciously not think about that somebody's hospitalized. Maybe I should think that they are still alive, right?
Right. It's most important that they think it, right? Because my brothers and sisters thinking I'm going to heal, it would not have helped me. It had to be me who did it. Right. But however, if that person's in a hospital and you can be there and you can say, all right, we're going to get you through this, and you can get them to believe it, then you're going to change. Then you're going to change their life. That's really the key. And if you look at it, it's very interesting because like I said, Buddhist is what you think you become. And Jesus, when he did healings, he said, "It is your faith that heals you." Well, he didn't. He never said it's your faith in me that heals you. It's your faith, your belief, your confidence, right? So if that person who's in the hospital can get their faith and belief in their healing, there's no reason why they can't heal. Because I should never have been able to jump off that tower, because that's what they told me. But I couldn't take their belief because I'm not going to live their life. I'm going to live mine, right? And that's what the person in the hospital did. However, when people are coming at you and they're constantly throwing stuff at you and throwing stuff on you as responsibilities on you, and you have to carry the weight of that responsibility, there are times when you have to realize the people who are doing that because they themselves feel weak. And they themselves feel like they can't achieve anything, or you know what I mean? So what is that? That's them believing that. That's them believing that.
Yeah.
And if they could change their beliefs about it. Now, here's the interesting thing is that when I changed my belief about money, this is going to sound very woo-woo or metaphysical, but when I changed my belief about money, I made more money. Like almost instantly, I made more money. Right? I just started saying, "Oh, I made money." And I started getting consciously focused on making money. And then what happened is my subconscious mind started showing me opportunity.
It's like opportunity. Kind of like manifesting kind of thing. Yes. But if you want to look at it from a metaphysical standpoint, Einstein said everything that you see in this world is made of atoms. And atoms are purely an energy event. There's nothing solid in them, right? Noetic science, the newest science in the market right now, noetic science, has just recently been able to measure thought waves. And when they measure the thought waves and those thoughts are focused at a very specific point in space, the waves stop at that point. They don't go past that point. And right now they're in the process of measuring what's happening at that point. They can tell something's happened. They just don't know what it is yet. So something is being created at the point in space where they're focusing their thought. So your thoughts are creative. So this is not spirituality I'm talking. These are science. These are real science tests, right? They're actually showing this. So what's really happening right now is the ancient texts and the spirituality and the woo-woo and all that is now starting to be proven in some form. And it's a matter of getting out of the esoterica of it and into the science of it. In the corporate world, they talk about, goal setting and achievement and all that stuff. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff, right? You talk to any of the top moneymakers in the country, the big CEOs, every one of them had vision boards that had pictures of what their goals and all the things they're going to achieve. Every one of them. They had some of them had it on their desktop as a screensaver, because they'd open their computer and there was all the things that they're creating into their experience. But in their mind, they weren't manifestations. They were just goals. But they're opening that screen and they were looking at that picture and their subconscious mind was drinking in and their belief was, I'm getting that. What did I just say earlier? Yeah. Moses said, God's name is I am. And Jesus said, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. I am getting that means you're manifesting it or creating it into your experience. So that's the thought that's going out and creating. I just remember as well that I did a lot of that one when I was studying my CPA and stuff, like putting I'm going to be a CPA. But, these things, sometimes we know it, but it's just we forget, like us human beings, we forget to do these things. So now it comes to mind that you are currently keynote speaker and you have corporate action hero. How was the transition and why do you think that it's important for you to impart the message, especially in corporate settings?
Well, that's a great question because, first of all, the transition was interesting. What happened was I was doing my comedy show all over the world, and I found that I was enjoying the time after the show more than I was the time on the stage, because I was out in the audience and I was helping people break past their limiting beliefs and achieve their goals. I still have letters from people today who told me I saved their marriages, and I did all these. It wasn't me that saved them. I just gave them the tools to do what they needed to do, right, and get to find their own belief. But I think I still get letters from people telling me that wow, that was amazing. So I said, well, I got to find a way to be able to do that, because that really fed my soul. But I also wanted to still crack whips and do nunchucks and do comedy and do all kinds of fun things like that, too. And then I started looking at the corporate world. And in the corporate world, it's a very unique place, because in the corporate world, they're very straight-laced, and they don't talk spirituality or metaphysics or any of that stuff. It's very, we are this, that way. And what's really interesting is I find that in the corporate world, a lot of people feel very repressed, feel very held back. And I thought, well, I don't want to go talk to the people who are already empowered. I want to go find the people that are really disempowered, and I want to empower them. And I thought, well, the greatest place to do that is in corporations, right? Go to corporations and empower them people. So I started creating these corporate speeches. And when I first started, I tried to mold myself to the corporate world. And I very quickly discovered that I didn't get any work. When I stopped molding myself to the corporate world and went in there as my authentic self and did the whips and the nunchucks and all the crazy stuff that I do with and stuff, I got work like crazy. And I'd finish a show and people would come up and say, oh my God, you changed my life. I'm doing something, I'm going to go do this right now. And they get all excited, and I get emails and people all over the world. One of the things I do in my main corporate speech, I find the most timid person I can find in my audience. I bring them to the stage, and under 5 minutes...
Then they just do like this.
They're terrified, right? Well, and that's a great, because what happens, they come to the stage, they're terrified. First thing I do is I smile at them, and I say, thank you so much for helping me. So what have I just done? I've just engaged their purpose. They're there to help me, not to be embarrassed. Right, so I've just taken them out of that one fear response. The next thing is I turn to the audience and I say, isn't she a rock star? And the audience cheers for her. Now, what was her biggest fear? That the audience wouldn't like her, or that she'd do something stupid in front of the audience. But if I get the audience to tell them they love her already, it knocks the fear right out. So I did that, right? So then the next thing I do is I start talking about fishing. And we just talk about fishing for a little while. And I say, have you ever cast a fishing rod? And she says, no or yes. Doesn't really matter what she says. I said, well, today I'm going to teach you the best way to cast a fishing rod. And she said, okay. And I pull out a whip, a bullwhip. And now she's freaking out because I have a bullwhip in my hand. So I know that her new fear is the whip. So I say to her, we're just using the whip as a fishing rod. It's the same motion. Don't worry about it. So I negate her belief about the whip. I take that out of the equation. Then, before she can think about the fact that she's holding a whip in her hand, I get a whole section of the audience to make a fish face. Looks like this, right? So then I say, and now what I want you to do is I want you to choose which fish you want to catch and just cast your fishing rod. And what happens is she casts her fishing rod and the whip cracks. It literally cracks really loud because it's the same motion, right? I said, that was great. Catch another fish. And she cracks it again. I get her to crack it 2 or 3 times. Then I reach into my bag and I pull out a target. And it's basically all it is. It's a pretzel rod, about a 9-inch pretzel. And I hold that in my hand. Now her new fear is what? Hurting me. I look her in the eye. I said, did you hear it crack? And she says, yes, I heard it crack. I said, so you already know how to make it crack. Don't worry about that. And so basically what I just did was I just told her that she doesn't have to learn it anymore. She now knows it. I changed her timeline from learning to knowledge, just with a sentence. The next thing I did was, all I want you to do is look right here and cast the fishing rod. That's all I want you to do. Don't worry about it. And then I see a little apprehension. I say, and I promise you're not going to hurt me, because her biggest fear is hurting me. And you can see her literally go, okay. She literally exhales. And then she casts the fishing rod and she hits the target without hitting me every time. Your fear is the thing that will always limit you from achievement. And if you can manage your fear response and your belief about your moment, she could have easily stayed in the belief that she was still learning the whip. But she took the fact, she believed me that she already knew how, right? So it was me manipulating her belief and me managing her fears. But she was the one who actually turned her brain off, her fears off, and got to that space. So it kind of proves the point. What happens is after that moment, so basically, let me go back. All of that happens in 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, she goes up on stage, embarrassed, learns how to crack a whip, and takes a target out of my hand in 5 minutes. I mean, that's amazing, really. In the whip world, that's an expert skill. Yeah. So she has just had a life-changing moment because, as I said earlier, she was the most timid person I could find. right? She has just walked on stage and cracked targets out of a guy's hand, and her audience is yelling that she's a rock star or an action hero. They're screaming for her. Woo! They're freaking out for her. She's just had a life-changing moment. Now, everybody in the audience who knows her and knows how timid she is has just said, "Oh my God, I can't believe she did it." So now I've changed the audience too. So that if she can do it, I can do it. So that's really kind of the way that works. And so I go into corporations, and I know I don't wear the tights that I wore before. I learned that after the third speech, I should stop wearing the tights. But yeah, I love with a passion what I do right now. It's so amazing because I still do whips and nunchucks and comedy, and I still do all that stuff, but I'm changing lives on a regular basis.
It's amazing, John, and thank you for the work that you do.
I often wonder if the big metaphysical healers, Jesus and all those, if instead of being healers, were they just really good convincers? You know, really just convincing people of their healing, convincing to take their beliefs. Because Jesus said it's your faith that heals you, right? And so that to me is an interesting concept, because if you can convince, that's all I do on stage with that woman is I convince her that she learned a skill. I convinced her she's not going to hurt me. That's all that really is. It's just convincing someone. I was one time speaking at an event in Canton, Ohio, just now south of my house here. And after I spoke, several people wanted to have private consultations with me. And so they put me up in this very weird little room in a balcony. And so people would come up the stairs to where I was, and we'd sit and we'd talk, and I'd try to break them out of their fears and get them moving forward. And this woman came up the stairs with two people helping her on either side and her using two canes, right? And I sat there and I talked with her for a while. And at the end of our talk, I walked her back out to her car. When she got to her car, she realized she forgot her canes without the help of two people. You can take whatever belief you want, and it will manifest into your experience. I could have easily said that I am paralyzed, and I would be paralyzed today.
More on the show. So
there are universal truths within all of it. And then when you really delve into Christianity, that's not mired down by the various disciplines of it. We define our creation. Because if, as I said earlier, if everything's pure energy, and you hold your hand up and you look at your hand is pure energy. But here's the weird part. The eyes that you're looking at that hand with are pure energy. And the air in between your eyes and that hand is pure energy. So the only thing you really are is your thought. And that's what got me out of the bed. Is that weird? Is that esoterically weird or what?
It's weird, but makes sense. No, but not really weird.
Einstein said, when you look at the smallest parts and you see how organized it is, he says, there's got to be some consciousness behind it. So Einstein used to say he believed in I believe in the God of Spinoza, is what he used to say. The God of Spinoza. Spinoza was a scientist who believed that there was a larger consciousness, but he didn't believe in a big bearded man on a cloud. He didn't believe in that sort of thing. He believed in a larger energetic consciousness. And Einstein believed in the God of what he called the God of Spinoza. And he believed that there was some higher intelligence. Now, in Hinduism, they talk about you being the center of a wagon wheel. And each spoke is a different lifetime. So they believe in reincarnation, right? The outer rim of that wheel is the higher consciousness that connects all the lives together, right? So it's really interesting because you talk to the people who've had past life regressions and things of that nature. They describe going into something and experiencing that lifetime when they get hypnotized. So, but on the outer circle is this consciousness that knows everything that happened in that person's life in Hinduism. So if that's the case, then our thoughts that are here now might be connected to this outer ring, which is a larger consciousness. If that's the case, then maybe it is organized that way. I'm not vain enough to say that's what it is. I'm pretty much agnostic. I look at everything as I don't know, but I find it fascinating to study.
Yeah, it is. It's a good point. And me, I grew up in a very conservative Catholic family, but after some time, I kind of not only limit my beliefs in that realm, I guess. And I'm very much of the thinking about the energy. And it really makes sense to me, especially faith healing or something about the energy and stuff. I think it's just because of that. But that's just my belief.
Well, no, you're saying the same thing I'm saying because, a quote-unquote faith healer, if you think about the first word of that, it's faith, right? The people who are healed by them put faith in their healing through them. Doesn't matter who they are.
True,
so they're believing they're healed because of that. And so it's their belief that healed them. And a lot of times the quote unquote faith healers are really just shysters. They're just making a living, making money off of other people's faith. Because the reality of it is, like I said earlier, they're probably just really good convincers.
But with the convincers, there are people who are good at convincing, and some people need those people to remind them, because there are people, maybe they just need someone to tell them.
They don't feel like they have the power within themselves, so they have to go somewhere else to put faith in something outside of themselves. And it's interesting because I too was raised Catholic, and my mom had her master's degree in liturgy, and she was actually head of liturgical doctrine at our church, which means that when the priest wanted to do a sermon, he had to pass it by my mom. So she could say, oh yeah, that is in alignment with what we believe. That's exactly what happened at the church. Well, when I turned 18, my mom said to me, she says, John, spirituality is a personal journey, and you have to come to your own beliefs. I hope you'll come back to Catholicism, but you need to come to your own beliefs. And then that's what made me go off and study. And what I found really interesting when I studied was I found truth in all of it, and I found junk in all of it, right? I found guilt and dogma and all these ceremonies and da-da-da-da-da-da. But then when you started looking, there's kindness and love in all of them, right? The Prophet Muhammad says, he who knows not kindness has no faith. And Islam gets such a bad rap these days, but the people who gave it the bad rap are doing horrific, non-peaceful things. And Islam means peace, and Muslim means I'm a follower of peace. So for them to attack a building or do a terrorist act, they're not Muslim. Right? Yeah. So that to me is a very interesting thing. I gave you that litany of thought quotes earlier. In those thought quotes, I mentioned Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and then I also mentioned Einstein and then Edgar Mitchell's Noetic Science and the thought patterns being. So there are universal truths within all of it. So I think it's a matter of looking at the truths. And then when you really delve into Christianity, that's not mired down by the various disciplines of it. When you travel through India, you're going to hear people talk about the prophet Isa all the time. And then they start telling you, well, he was here, and they tell you the path that he walked and the things that he did all through India. And then you find out so what happened to Isa? Well, he went back to his country and was crucified. He literally was Jesus in between the time he was a child and he was 30, that he's not in the Bible. They know where he was in India, which is fascinating. So
before we wrap up, what is the difference between an action hero and a superhero?
That's a great question. Great question. An action hero is an ordinary individual who creates an extraordinary result. Now, the word action means create motion, start momentum, or to do something. The word hero is someone who achieves extraordinary results in service of others. A superhero is someone who wears their underwear on the outside of their pants, who are irradiated by some sort of goo, and probably have superpowers, which means if they're doing super things, that means they're really not getting out of their box. They're really kind of slackers because, if you have superpowers and you do super things, you're really not doing much.
Love it. So if you were to star in an action movie that has been released in the past, or maybe you can make up your own movie, what movie would it be?
What movie would it be? Well, I would love to have been in Princess Bride, but I would have loved to have been Wesley, but I built more like Fezzik, giant. I would have loved to have been the sword fighter guy, because sword fighting is a passion of mine. And so if you give me a chance to do that, if I was going to be in a superhero movie, they would cast me as the Hulk, but I would really want to be Captain America. Because first of all, I'm a very old-fashioned kind of person, but the second of all, I like the integrity of that character. It really says a lot about the person.
Yeah, what he embodies, right?
Yeah, even when he became Captain America, they said, good gets better. And so they chose the best person they could find, and they gave him this serum, and they become a great person. That's what I would hope I would embody in my life. And I really hope that I'm like a boat going down through a river, leaving a positive wake behind me.
Great. And one last question. So if you were to make a grand entrance to a room, what would be your theme song?
Oh, Crack That Whip. Devo. I would come on stage and I would start cracking whips like crazy.
Okay, great. That was fun. So, John, where can our Zesties find you?
Easiest place to find me is corporateactionhero.com. You can find all kinds of interesting stuff on there. If you want my 5F workbook, it's a free gift, and that means free means you don't even have to give me an email address or nothing. You just go to corporateactionhero.com/gift, and you have to go to that link because you're not going to find it on the web. That's a direct link that you have to go to. If you want daily motivation, go to Corporate Action Hero on YouTube. I put out a video every morning. And I have done so for the past 4 years. So there's a lot of motivational, 2 to 3 minutes a piece, probably, sometimes 9 8 or 9 minutes, but usually 2 to 3 minutes. Every day you'll get just a little something. And I just released a workbook on effective communication. And if you're looking for ways to communicate better and to not elicit fears in your communications, that's available on my website. And on August 1st, I'm releasing a full online course it's called the Interaction Hero Self-Confidence course. And it's all about building your self-confidence and getting out of your way. Right now, it's on pre-sale. It releases August 1st. If you buy it on pre-sale, you get $50 off the price, and on August 1st, you get all the modules.
Oh, great. Looking forward to that, John. I think I really need that one.
I don't think so. I think you've got great confidence.
When I had the interview with John, we actually had a lot of distractions as there were some personal stuff that needed to be sorted out back in the Philippines, so I keep getting calls during the interview. He gave me personal advice, but I thought I'd still share it with you, Zesties, as it's very insightful.
When people are contacting you, you got to remember, they're living their experience. You don't have to take their experience as yours, okay? Because they're going to throw things on top of you and put a lot of responsibility on you. That's their choice to try to do that, right? You can only do what you can only do what you do. But the other thing you can do is you can also think about it this way. They're doing the best they can with what they know, right? And like my father was an abuser and a horrible person. But when I finally broke past that, it was because I said he did the best he could with what he knew. Because his father was an alcoholic and an abuser. So the experiences of their life, I don't have to take on and repeat anybody else's junk. So that's just for you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Okay. What do you think of this week's episode? This pandemic alone added a lot of anxiety and worry alongside my other worries in life. Having some kind of outlet, may it be people, things, and most of all faith, does keep us grounded. So I hope you Zesties have gained some insights on this week's episode. If you have some episode suggestions, please send them through to gleefultalkshow@gmail.com. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, or follow us at Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. If you'd like to buy me a cup of coffee or two, please head down to the episode notes to find out how. And this episode is recorded via riverside.fm. If you're a podcaster or content creator and would like to try it out, I've got an affiliate link on the episode notes below, and key in MediaBoard25 to get 25% discount on your first 3 months of subscription.